Subscribe to Storylab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. Chapter 1. The Perfect Life. Clay Wright adjusted his dress blues one final time before entering the officers' club at Naval Base Coronado. 20 years of service, 15 as a Navy SEAL, and 8 as the primary instructor for SEAL Team 6 had earned him respect that bordered on reverence. At 42, he still maintained the physique that had made him legendary among special forces. The man who could outrun recruits half his age and whose training methods had produced some of the most elite warriors in the world. Clay, General Roger Swanson's booming voice cut through the ambient chatter. His father-in-law approached with the measured stride of a man accustomed to commanding rooms full of colonels and admirals. 4 stars gleamed on his shoulders, each representing decades of military excellence. Congratulations on the promotion consideration. Clay shook the offered hand, noting the firm grip that had never softened despite Roger's 63 years. Thank you, sir. Though I'm curious why they're considering me for a desk job in Washington when my expertise is in the field. Roger's weathered face creased into what might have been a smile. Not everything is what it appears, son. Walk with me. They moved to a quieter corner of the club, past tables filled with officers celebrating their own achievements. Clay had attended dozens of these events over the years, but tonight felt different. There was an undercurrent of tension he couldn't identify, like the moments before a mission when intelligence felt incomplete. You know, when Sarah first introduced you to me 18 years ago, I thought she'd lost her mind, Roger said, swirling his whiskey. A young SEAL with more scars than sense, proposing to my daughter after knowing her for 6 months. Clay remembered that meeting vividly. Sarah had been 24, fresh out of Georgetown with a political science degree and eyes that could stop traffic. She'd been working as a legislative aide when they met at a charity gala in D.C. He'd been on leave, uncomfortable in his dress uniform, when she'd approached him. You proved me wrong, Roger continued. 2 kids, a stable marriage, and a career that makes me proud to call you family. Mitchell and Jordan turned out well, considering they had a father who was deployed more often than he was home. Mitchell, 26, had followed Clay into the Navy, but chose intelligence over special operations. Jordan, 24, had surprised everyone by becoming a federal prosecutor. Both had inherited Sarah's intellect and Clay's determination, creating a family dynamic that had always felt too perfect to be real. Sir, is there something specific you wanted to discuss? Clay asked. Roger rarely engaged in nostalgic conversations without purpose. Patience, Clay. I've learned that the best operations require proper setup. Roger finished his drink and set the glass down with deliberate precision. Tell me, in all your years of training SEALs, what's the most important lesson you teach them? Trust your team, but verify everything yourself. Exactly. Verification. Roger's eyes hardened slightly. I have a proposition for you. A special assignment that would utilize your unique skill set. Interested, Clay studied his father-in-law's expression. 20 years of reading people in life-or-death situations had taught him to recognize when someone was holding back critical information. What kind of assignment? The kind that requires absolute discretion. The kind that doesn't officially exist. Roger leaned forward. There's a unit being formed. Elite operators with specific qualifications. You be the commanding officer. What qualifications? Operators who've been involved in classified missions that have become politically sensitive. Men who understand the necessity of plausible deniability. Roger's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Men who know things that powerful people would prefer remain buried. Clay felt the first chill of unease. He'd participated in dozens of black operations over his career. Missions that would never appear in official records. Actions taken to protect national interests in ways the public could never know. Every SEAL at his level had similar experiences. It was part of the job. When would this unit be activated? Clay asked. Soon. Very soon. I'll be in touch with details. Roger stood, smoothing his uniform. Give my love to Sarah. Tell her I'm looking forward to our dinner tomorrow night. Clay watched his father-in-law leave, the unease growing stronger. In 2 decades of military service, he'd learned to trust his instincts. Right now, They were screaming that something was terribly wrong. Chapter 2. Cracks in the Foundation. Clay arrived home to find Sarah in the kitchen, still dressed in the burgundy cocktail dress she'd worn to the officers' club. She was loading the dishwasher with unusual efficiency, her movements sharp and purposeful. After 18 years of marriage, he recognized the signs of controlled agitation. "How was your conversation with Dad?" she asked without turning around. "Interesting. He mentioned dinner tomorrow night." Sarah's hand paused on a wine glass. "Yes, about that. I invited Lawrence as well. You remember Lawrence Graham from my office?" Clay did remember Lawrence Graham. Tall, polished, the kind of man who looked like he'd stepped off a congressional campaign poster. He worked as a senior analyst at the Pentagon, specializing in budget allocation for special operations programs. More importantly, he'd been finding excuses to attend Sarah's work functions for the past 6 months. "Any particular reason?" Clay asked, studying his wife's profile. "He's been helping me with research for the foundation. We're considering expanding our veteran support programs, and his expertise in military budgeting could be valuable." The Wright Foundation had been Sarah's passion project for the past 5 years, focusing on supporting families of fallen special operations personnel. It was meaningful work that had garnered significant political and social support. Clay had always been proud of her dedication, even when it meant late nights and weekend meetings. "Where are Mitchell and Jordan these days?" Clay asked, changing the subject. "Mitchell's in Norfolk, working on some intelligence assessment. Jordan's in Chicago, prosecuting that organized crime case. She called yesterday, said the trial might run longer than expected." Clay nodded, but something in Sarah's tone felt rehearsed. In 20 years of analyzing human behavior under stress, he developed an ability to detect deception that bordered on supernatural. His wife was lying about something, though he couldn't identify what. "I'm going to check on some equipment in the garage," he said. The garage served as Clay's personal armory and training space, equipped with gear that most Special Forces units would envy. He'd spent years accumulating weapons, surveillance equipment, and tactical gear that officially didn't exist. It was a habit born from missions where official support might evaporate without warning. As he cleaned his primary sidearm, a customized Sig Sauer P226 that had accompanied him through countless operations, Clay's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number, the warehouse on Pier 47. "Tomorrow, 2,100 hours. Come alone. Art.S. Roger Swanson." Clay stared at the message, his unease crystallizing into something approaching alarm. Pier 47 was in an industrial section of the harbor, isolated and perfect for activities that required privacy. The time, 9 p.m., suggested something that couldn't occur during normal business hours. He opened his laptop and began researching the location. Pier 47 housed 3 warehouses, all officially vacant according to city records. However, maritime shipping databases showed irregular activity over the past month, vehicles arriving at odd hours, utility usage that didn't match vacancy status. Clay's training kicked in automatically. He began documenting everything. The text message, the warehouse information, Roger's behavior at the officers' club, Sarah's unusual demeanor. Pattern recognition was fundamental to SEAL operations, and patterns were emerging that suggested a threat he couldn't yet define. His phone rang. The caller ID showed Jordan's number. "Hey, Dad. Jordan, how's the trial going? Actually, that's why I'm calling. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Clay's grip tightened on the phone. "What is it? Have you ever been involved in any operations that weren't officially sanctioned? Anything that might have violated international law?" The question hit Clay like a physical blow. His daughter was a federal prosecutor with security clearance high enough to access classified information. She wouldn't ask such a question casually. "Why are you asking?" "Dad, please. Just answer the question." Clay considered his response carefully. The truth was that every elite Special Forces operator had participated in missions that existed in legal gray areas. Protecting national security sometimes required actions that couldn't survive public scrutiny. "Jordan, you know I can't discuss classified operations, even with you." "I was afraid you'd say that." Her voice carried a weight that suggested she was carrying information she didn't want to possess. "Dad, be careful. Please. I can't say more, but be very careful who you trust right now." The line went dead. Clay stared at his phone, pieces of a puzzle beginning to form in his mind. Roger's sudden interest in a special unit for operators who knew sensitive information. Sarah's unusual behavior and her growing relationship with Lawrence Graham. Jordan's warning and her knowledge of classified operations that should be beyond her clearance level. He was being set up. The realization brought a cold clarity that Clay hadn't experienced since his last combat deployment. Someone, possibly multiple people he trusted, was planning his elimination. The warehouse meeting wasn't a briefing for a new assignment. It was likely his execution. Clay Wright had survived 20 years in special operations by being paranoid, prepared, and absolutely ruthless when necessary. Tomorrow night, those skills will be put to their ultimate test. Chapter 3. The Trap Springs. Clay arrived at Pier 47 30 minutes early, having spent the afternoon conducting reconnaissance of the entire area. The warehouse district was exactly as isolated as he'd expected. No foot traffic, minimal security lighting, and multiple escape routes for anyone who knew how to navigate industrial environments. He'd equipped himself appropriately. Ceramic body armor beneath his jacket, his primary and backup sidearms, tactical knife, and a small explosive device he'd assembled from training materials. Most importantly, he carried a tiny wireless camera that would broadcast to a secure server he'd established earlier that day. The warehouse Roger had specified sat at the end of the pier, its loading docks facing the water. Clay positioned himself in an abandoned crane operator's booth with clear sight lines to all approaches. Through his night vision scope, he watched vehicles arrive with military precision. First came a black SUV that disgorged 4 men in tactical gear, Navy SEALs, based on their movement patterns and equipment. Clay recognized 2 of them, Danny North and Max Lynn, both operators he'd personally trained. The recognition sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the evening air. A second vehicle arrived 10 minutes later. Roger Swanson emerged, along with Lawrence Graham and 2 more SEALs Clay didn't recognize. The group moved into the warehouse with practiced efficiency, establishing a perimeter that would prevent anyone inside from leaving. Clay's phone buzzed with another message. "Time to come in. Don't keep us waiting." He checked his equipment one final time, activated the wireless camera, and began his approach to the warehouse. Every instinct screamed at him to abort, but he needed to understand the full scope of the betrayal. Knowledge was survival in his world. The warehouse's main entrance stood open, lights spilling into the industrial darkness. Clay stepped through the doorway to find exactly what Jordan's warning had prepared him for, an execution chamber disguised as a briefing room. 20 Navy SEALs stood in formation, their faces grim and professional. Clay recognized every one of them, operators he'd trained, mentored, and led through missions that had forged bonds he believed were unbreakable. At the center of the group stood Roger Swanson, Lawrence Graham, and a woman Clay had never seen before. "Ah, Clay, right on time." Roger's voice carried the authority of decades in command. "I believe you know most of the men here." Clay scanned the faces, noting the mix of expressions. Some showed discomfort, others resignation, a few displayed what might have been guilt. None showed surprise at his presence, confirming that they'd all been briefed on what was about to occur. "What's this about, Roger?" "This is about cleaning up loose ends," Roger replied, moving to stand behind a table that held files Clay recognized as classified operation records. "Over the past 20 years, you've participated in 17 missions that officially never happened. Missions that involved actions that could be considered war crimes if they became public knowledge." Lawrence Graham stepped forward, his political smile replaced by something harder. "The current administration is conducting a comprehensive review of special operations activities. They're particularly interested in operations that might embarrass our allies or provide ammunition for our enemies." Clay felt the trap closing around him, but kept his expression neutral. "And you think I'm a liability?" "We know you are," the unknown woman said, speaking for the first time. Her voice carried a slight accent Clay couldn't place. "My name is Elena Vasquez. I represent certain interests that would prefer these operations remain permanently classified. Roger opened one of the files. Operation Nightshade, 2018. You led a team into sovereign territory to eliminate a target that threatened arms deals worth $3 billion. The target was a journalist. Operation Darkwater, 2019. Lawrence continued, reading from another file. You personally executed 6 civilians to maintain operational security during an extraction mission. Clay realized they were building a case for his elimination by listing operations that had been officially sanctioned at the highest levels. The truth didn't matter. What mattered was creating justification for the men in this room to participate in his murder. Every mission I conducted was authorized by the appropriate command structure, Clay said. Authorization that can be denied by people who are now dead or who have reasons to forget they ever existed, Elena replied. You've become what we call a knowledge liability. You know too much, and you represent too great a risk to people who matter more than you do. Roger gestured to the assembled SEALs. These men have been briefed on the situation. They understand that sometimes protecting the greater good requires difficult decisions. Clay looked again at the faces of men he'd trained to be the finest warriors in the world. Danny North couldn't meet his eyes. Max Lynn's jaw was clenched tight enough to crack teeth. Others showed varying degrees of discomfort, but none showed rebellion. There's one more thing, Clay, Roger said, his voice carrying a note of satisfaction. Sarah and I decided it would be appropriate for her to witness this. She needs to understand the kind of man she married. A section of the warehouse wall, which Clay now realized was one-way glass, illuminated to reveal an observation deck. Sarah stood behind the glass, her face a mask of cold indifference. Beside her stood Mitchell and Jordan, both in military dress uniforms. The betrayal was complete. His wife, his children, his father-in-law, and the men he'd trained had all conspired to eliminate him. Clay Wright, the man who had dedicated his life to protecting others, had been marked for death by everyone he trusted. Roger nodded to someone outside Clay's line of sight. The warehouse's loading doors began closing with hydraulic precision, sealing off all exits. Vents in the ceiling opened, and Clay could hear the hiss of gas beginning to flood the enclosed space. I'm sorry it has to end this way, Roger said, moving toward a door that would lead to the observation deck. But some sacrifices are necessary for the greater good. Clay watched his family and his protege disappear through the door, leaving him alone with 20 of the deadliest operators in the world and a rapidly filling cloud of gas that would kill them all in minutes. That's when Clay Wright smiled for the first time in months. There's just one thing you all forgot, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the warehouse as the gas thickened around them. The SEALs shifted uneasily, their training warring with the reality of their situation. I'm the man who trained every single one of you. Chapter 4. The hunter becomes the prey. The gas filling the warehouse was chlorine-based, designed to kill quickly and leave minimal forensic evidence. Clay had encountered similar compounds during his training for chemical warfare scenarios. Most importantly, he knew that the standard-issue gas masks these SEALs carried would provide only limited protection against this specific compound. Clay, however, had come prepared. The device he'd planted outside the warehouse wasn't an explosive. It was an electromagnetic pulse generator he'd constructed using techniques learned during a classified mission in Eastern Europe. When he triggered it remotely, the EMP disabled the electronic locks on the loading doors and shut down the gas dispersal system. In the confusion that followed, Clay moved like the predator he'd been trained to be. Danny North was closest, his attention focused on the malfunctioning gas system. Clay struck him in the throat with surgical precision, a blow that would incapacitate without permanent damage. As Danny collapsed, Clay acquired his tactical vest and gas mask in one fluid motion. He's making a move, Max Lynn shouted, bringing his weapon to bear. But Clay had already disappeared into the artificial fog created by the disrupted gas system. 20 years of training SEALs had taught him every technique they would use to hunt him, because he had developed most of those techniques himself. The warehouse became a maze of shadows and lethal confusion. Clay moved between shipping containers and industrial equipment, using his superior knowledge of their training to stay ahead of their search patterns. More importantly, he began turning their own methods against them. He emerged from the fog behind two SEALs who were moving in standard formation. A sleeper hold dropped the first. A nerve strike paralyzed the second's weapon arm long enough for Clay to disarm him. Neither man died, but both were effectively removed from the hunt. "This is wrong," one of the remaining SEALs shouted. "He's not fighting to kill us. He should be." Clay's voice echoed from multiple directions, a trick using the warehouse's acoustics that he'd learned during urban warfare training. "But you came here to murder me based on lies. I came here to learn the truth." The loading doors were beginning to open as emergency systems restored partial power. Clay could see Roger Swanson and Lawrence Graham in the observation deck, their expressions shifting from confidence to concern as they realized their trap had failed. Clay moved to a position beneath the observation deck and activated the wireless camera he'd planted. His voice carried through the warehouse's intercom system, another system he'd studied during his reconnaissance. "Everyone in this room needs to understand what's really happening here," Clay announced. "You've been told I'm a liability because of classified operations. But look at who's giving you those orders." Through the intercom, his voice reached not only the SEALs in the warehouse, but also the conspirators in the observation deck. Roger Swanson, a 4-star general with access to special operations budgets. Lawrence Graham, who controls funding for black operations. Elena Vasquez, who represents certain interests that profit from military contracts. Clay paused, allowing his words to sink in. This isn't about eliminating a security risk. This is about eliminating a witness to their corruption. "He's lying." Roger's voice boomed through the intercom from the observation deck. "Complete the mission." But doubt had entered the equation. Clay watched as several of the SEALs lowered their weapons, their expressions shifting from professional determination to confusion. These were men trained to follow orders, but they were also intelligent enough to recognize when something didn't align with their understanding of right and wrong. Clay pressed his advantage. "Ask yourselves why my own family is watching this execution. Ask why a Pentagon budget analyst is involved in a special operations decision. Ask why someone who won't even identify her organization is calling the shots." "Enough." Lawrence Graham's voice carried panic. "Gas the building again." But the EMP had damaged more than just the locks. Clay had spent hours studying the warehouse's systems, and he'd targeted every electronic component that could be used against him. The backup gas system sparked and died as it attempted to activate. That's when Clay made his move to end the immediate threat. He emerged from the shadows with 2 smoke grenades, standard SEAL equipment he'd acquired from the men he'd incapacitated. The warehouse filled with dense white smoke that reduced visibility to near zero while providing Clay with the cover he needed for what came next. In the chaos that followed, Clay systematically disabled the remaining SEALs using techniques they'd never been taught to counter, because he'd never taught them to anyone. By the time the smoke cleared, 20 of the most elite warriors in the world were unconscious, zip-tied, or otherwise incapacitated. Clay Wright stood alone in the warehouse, breathing hard but victorious. Above him, he could see figures moving frantically in the observation deck. Roger, Lawrence, and Elena were discovering that their execution chamber had become their prison. Clay activated his phone and placed a call he'd hoped he'd never have to make. "Admiral Chun, this is Captain Wright. I need to report a conspiracy involving the murder of active duty personnel and the corruption of special operations funding. I have 20 witnesses and recorded evidence." Through the observation deck glass, Clay could see Sarah's face. For the first time since he'd known her, his wife looked genuinely afraid. The hunt was just beginning. Chapter 5: Unraveling the Web. Admiral Charlie Chun arrived at Pier 47 with a team of Naval Criminal Investigative Service agents and medical personnel. Chun had been Clay's commanding officer during his early SEAL years and was one of the few people in the military hierarchy that Clay trusted completely. "Clay, what the hell happened here?" Chun surveyed the warehouse full of unconscious SEALs and the observation deck containing Clay's family and co-conspirators. "A failed assassination disguised as a mission briefing, sir." Clay handed Chun a tablet containing the wireless camera footage. Everything's recorded. The whole setup, the gas attack, the participants. Chun watched the footage, his expression growing darker with each revelation. Roger Swanson's involvement makes this a national security issue. We'll need to handle this through special channels. Admiral, there's more. Clay connected his phone to the tablet, displaying financial records he'd been analyzing during his reconnaissance. I've been tracking unusual fund transfers from Pentagon black budget accounts. Lawrence Graham has been redirecting money intended for special operations into shell companies. The financial data told a story of systematic theft that had been occurring for years. Millions of dollars meant for equipment, training, and support for special forces had been flowing into accounts controlled by Lawrence Graham and Elena Vasquez. The money was then invested in defense contracts that provided enormous returns to the conspirators. How much are we talking about? Chun asked. Conservative estimate? $40 million over 3 years. But that's just what I could trace with limited access. With proper investigation resources, I suspect the real number is much higher. Chun was studying the financial records when Clay's phone rang. The caller ID showed Mitchell's number. Dad, Mitchell's voice was strained. Are you all right? I'm fine, son. Are you? I don't know. Mom brought me and Jordan here tonight and told us you were being exposed as a traitor. She said General Swanson had evidence that you'd been selling classified information to foreign governments. Clay felt a familiar chill. What did you believe? I wanted to believe her, but Mitchell's voice trailed off. Dad, I've been working intelligence analysis for 4 years. I know what real evidence looks like, and what she showed us didn't make sense. Too convenient, too clean. Where are you now? Still in the observation area. General Swanson is trying to convince everyone that you've snapped, that you attacked loyal SEALs because you knew you were about to be exposed. Mom and Lawrence are backing him up. Clay looked up at the observation deck, where he could see animated discussions taking place between Roger, Sarah, and Lawrence. Elena Vasquez had disappeared, likely through an exit Clay hadn't identified. Mitchell, I need you to listen carefully. Your mother and Lawrence Graham have been stealing money from military budgets. The evidence is on the tablet I'm showing Admiral Chun right now. General Swanson is involved, possibly as the inside source who provided access to classified operations. Dad, that's... Mitchell paused. That would explain some anomalies I've been seeing in budget reports. Jordan and I both noticed irregularities, but we assumed they were clerical errors. Jordan's been investigating this too. She's been looking into it from the legal side. Some of the shell companies Lawrence created were incorporated in jurisdictions where she has prosecutorial authority. She's been building a case, but she couldn't tell us who was involved until she had solid evidence. Clay began to understand why Jordan had called him with warnings. She'd been trying to protect him while building a legal case against the conspirators. Her presence at the warehouse wasn't participation in his assassination. It was evidence gathering. Mitchell, where's your sister now? She left about 10 minutes ago. Said she had calls to make. Admiral Chun approached Clay with the tablet. I've reviewed the footage and the financial records. This is going to require coordination with multiple agencies. NCIS for the military angle, FBI for the financial crimes, possibly CIA for the international connections. Sir, I need to know something. Was there ever any genuine concern about my involvement in unauthorized operations? Chin's expression softened. Clay, every special operations officer at your level has participated in missions that exist in gray areas. That's the nature of the work. But there was never any official investigation or concern about your activities. This whole thing appears to have been manufactured to justify your elimination. Clay's phone buzzed with a text from Jordan. Dad, federal agents are en route to your location. I've been coordinating with prosecutors in 3 states. We have arrest warrants ready for Graham, Vasquez, and 2 others. Working on Swanson, more complicated due to his position. Stay safe. Clay showed the message to Admiral Chun, who nodded grimly. Your daughter's been busy. This level of coordination suggests she's been working this case for months. Admiral, I need to get up to that observation deck. Sarah needs to understand what's going to happen next. Clay, are you sure you want to confront her? This level of betrayal. Sir, 18 years of marriage doesn't end without a conversation, even if it ends with one. Admiral Chun gestured to two NCIS agents. Escort Captain Wright to the observation area. Ensure his safety, but allow him to speak with the subjects. Clay climbed the stairs to the observation deck with a clarity of purpose he hadn't felt in months. The woman who had shared his bed, raised his children, and listened to his fears about missions that could have killed him had orchestrated his murder for money. That conversation was going to be very interesting. Chapter 6. The Reckoning. The observation deck felt smaller than it had appeared from below, cramped with the weight of betrayal and broken trust. Sarah stood near the one-way glass, still wearing the burgundy dress from the previous evening, though it now looked wrinkled and inappropriate for the industrial setting. Lawrence Graham had positioned himself near what appeared to be a secondary exit, while Roger Swanson maintained his military bearing despite the circumstances collapsing around him. Clay entered with the two NCIS agents flanking him, his presence immediately commanding the attention of everyone in the room. For 18 years, Sarah had seen him in various states, exhausted from training, wounded from missions, celebrating promotions, but she'd never seen him like this. There was a coldness in his eyes that suggested something fundamental had changed. "Hello, Sarah." "Clay." Her voice was steady, but Clay could see the micro-expressions that indicated fear beneath her composed exterior. "I suppose you think you've won something here. I think I prevented my own murder. Whether that constitutes winning depends on your perspective." Lawrence Graham stepped forward, his political instincts apparently telling him to control the narrative. "Clay, you need to understand that this situation is more complex than it appears. There are national security implications you're not aware of." Clay turned his attention to Lawrence with the focused intensity he'd once reserved for enemy combatants. Lawrence Graham, 43 years old, divorced, no children. You've been stealing money from special operations budgets for 3 years, investing it in defense contracts that you helped secure through your position at the Pentagon. Net worth has increased from $100,000 to approximately $8 million during that period. Lawrence's face went pale. "How could you possibly know?" "Because when someone plans to murder me, I make it my business to know everything about them." Clay's voice carried the quiet authority of absolute certainty. "Your Swiss bank account, your shell companies in Delaware and the Cayman Islands, your stock holdings in defense contractors. I know all of it." Clay shifted his attention to Roger. General Roger Swanson, 4-star general with a distinguished career spanning 35 years. Also the man who provided classified information about special operations to justify stealing money meant to support the men who risked their lives for this country. Roger's military composure cracked slightly. "Clay, you don't understand the bigger picture. The money was being diverted to fund operations that couldn't go through official channels. Operations that protect American interests in ways the public could never comprehend. Operations like murdering a Navy SEAL who might ask uncomfortable questions about missing funds. You were becoming a liability," Sarah said, speaking for the first time since Clay's arrival. Her voice carried a hardness he'd never heard before. "Your reputation, your access to classified information, your relationships with active SEALs. You could have exposed everything we'd worked to build." Clay stared at his wife, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time in their marriage. "Everything you'd worked to build. What exactly was that, Sarah?" "Financial security, political influence, a future that didn't depend on your ability to survive whatever insane mission the Navy sent you on next." Sarah's composure was beginning to crack. "Do you have any idea what it's like being married to someone who might not come home? Living with the constant fear that every deployment could be the last one. So you decided to ensure it would be." Sarah's laugh was bitter. "I decided to take control of our future. Lawrence offered me something you never could. Stability, wealth, and a life that didn't revolve around military service." Clay felt something inside him close off permanently, like a security door sealing a compromised section of a ship. "When did it start?" "The affair? 2 years ago. The financial planning? About 6 months after that." Sarah seemed to find strength in her honesty. "Roger provided the access to classified operations data. I provided social connections and cover through the foundation. Lawrence provided the technical expertise to move the money. And Elena Vasquez? She represents investors who wanted to ensure their defense contracts remained profitable. Having access to inside information about special operations requirements is extremely valuable in the defense industry. Clay absorbed this information with the detached analysis he'd once applied to enemy intelligence. His wife had not only betrayed him personally, but had compromised national security for financial gain. The woman he'd trusted with his life had sold that life for money. What about Mitchell and Jordan? They weren't supposed to know anything. But Jordan started investigating financial irregularities, and Mitchell began asking questions about budget anomalies. We had to bring them in gradually, make them understand the stakes. The stakes being that their father needed to die to protect your bank account. Rogers stepped forward, apparently attempting to reassert some form of authority. Clay, this isn't personal. This is about protecting assets and operations that serve the greater good. Sometimes sacrifices have to be made. Clay's response was interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Jordan appeared in the doorway, followed by 2 FBI agents and an NCIS investigator Clay didn't recognize. Sarah Wright, Lawrence Graham, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, theft of government funds, and violations of the Espionage Act. Jordan's voice carried the professional authority of a federal prosecutor, but Clay could see the pain in her eyes. General Swanson, you're being detained pending a full investigation by military authorities. Sarah's composed facade finally shattered. Jordan, you don't understand what you're doing. This will destroy everything we've worked for, everything we've built. Jordan looked at her mother with an expression that combined love and disgust. Mom, you try to have Dad murdered. You stole money from programs that support military families. There's nothing left to understand. As the agents began processing the arrests, Clay found himself alone with Sarah for a moment. She looked at him with something that might have been regret. Clay, I want you to know that I did love you. At the beginning, at least. Clay studied the woman who had shared his life for 18 years, who had given him 2 children, who had just confessed to orchestrating his murder. Sarah, I want you to know something too. What? I'm going to make sure you serve every day of your sentence. I'm going to testify at your trial. I'm going to provide evidence of every crime you committed, and I'm going to watch you lose everything you thought you were protecting. Clay's voice carried no anger, only the cold promise of absolute determination. You want stability? You're going to have 30 years in federal prison to think about it. Sarah was led away in handcuffs, followed by Lawrence and then Roger. The observation deck emptied until only Clay, Jordan, and Mitchell remained. Dad, Mitchell said quietly, I'm sorry. We should have seen this, should have warned you. Clay looked at his children, both adults now, both having chosen to stand with justice rather than family loyalty when the choice became necessary. You did warn me, both of you. That's why I survived. Jordan approached her father hesitantly. What happens now? Clay Wright, the man who had just survived betrayal by everyone he trusted most in the world, smiled at his children, the only family he had left. Now we rebuild, and we make sure something like this never happens again. Chapter 7. The Network Exposed. 3 weeks after the warehouse incident, Clay Wright sat in a secure conference room at Naval Base Coronado, surrounded by investigators from multiple agencies. The scope of the conspiracy had expanded far beyond what anyone had initially imagined. Captain Wright, we need to discuss Elena Vasquez, FBI Special Agent Troy Fry said, sliding a thick file across the table. She didn't disappear after the warehouse. She's been very busy. Clay opened the file to find surveillance photographs, financial records, and communication intercepts that painted a picture of international espionage disguised as defense contracting. Elena Vasquez wasn't just representing certain interests. She was a foreign intelligence operative who had been systematically compromising American special operations for 3 years. She's Russian SVR, Agent Fry continued. Her real name is Elena Petrov. The shell companies Lawrence Graham created weren't just for money laundering. They were funneling classified information about American special operations to Russian intelligence. Admiral Chun leaned forward from his position at the head of the table. Clay, This means every mission you've been involved in for the past 3 years has potentially been compromised. Every SEAL you've trained, every operation you've planned, the Russians may have had advanced intelligence. The implications hit Clay like a physical blow. 3 years of compromised operations meant American lives had been at risk because his wife's greed had opened a channel to enemy intelligence. How many missions had failed because the enemy knew they were coming? How many operators had died because Elena Petrov had access to their plans? There's more, Agent Fry said grimly. We've identified at least 12 other military personnel who were approached by this network. Some took money and provided information. Others, like you, were marked for elimination because they couldn't be compromised. Clay studied the list of names. Some were officers he'd worked with. Others were SEALs he'd trained. All had been targeted by a network that had wormed its way into every level of Special Operations Command structure. Agent Fry, where is Elena Vasquez now? We don't know. She disappeared from the warehouse that night and hasn't surfaced since. However, we believe she's still in the country, trying to extract other assets before returning to Russia. Admiral Chun pulled out another file. Clay, there's something else you need to know. Sarah's foundation, the one that was supposed to support families of fallen operators, was being used as a front for money laundering. Families who should have received support were denied assistance, while the money was diverted to fund Elena's intelligence operations. Clay felt a cold rage building in his chest. It was one thing to betray him personally, but using a foundation meant to help military families as cover for espionage crossed a line that demanded consequences beyond prison sentences. Admiral, I want to volunteer for the operation to locate Elena Vasquez. Clay, you're personally compromised in this situation. Protocol requires the most qualified operator for the mission, sir. I know her methods, I know her network, and I have personal motivation to see this through. Clay's voice carried the quiet authority that had made him one of the most respected SEALs in the service. More importantly, she knows me. She'll expect me to come after her, and that expectation can be used against her. Agent Fry exchanged glances with Admiral Chun. Captain Wright, what are you proposing? Elena Vasquez has been playing a long game, building assets and extracting intelligence over years. But now she's been exposed and is operating in crisis mode. Crisis mode means mistakes, and mistakes create opportunities. Clay stood and moved to a whiteboard, beginning to outline his analysis. She can't leave the country through normal channels because she's now a known intelligence asset. She can't go to ground indefinitely because her handlers in Moscow will expect results. She needs to extract whatever assets she can and find an alternative route out of the country. Clay drew connections between known associates, financial accounts, and operational patterns. She has two priorities: protecting the network she's built and escaping with actionable intelligence. Those priorities create a conflict that we can exploit. How? Admiral Chun asked. We make her choose between them. Force her to either abandon her assets to escape or stay to protect them and risk capture. Clay turned from the whiteboard to face the assembled investigators. But we need to offer her something irresistible, intelligence that's valuable enough to make her take the risk. Agent Fry was studying Clay's diagram. What kind of intelligence? Clay smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. Information about a special operations unit being formed to hunt down foreign intelligence assets operating on American soil. A unit commanded by a Navy SEAL with intimate knowledge of Russian methods and personal motivation to succeed. You want to use yourself as bait. I want to give her the opportunity to complete one final operation, eliminating the man who destroyed her network. Elena Vasquez is a professional, but she's also human. The chance to personally resolve the threat I represent will be impossible for her to resist. Admiral Chun considered the proposal. Clay, if this goes wrong, you could end up dead for real this time. Sir, she's already tried to have me killed once. The difference is that now I know she's coming, and now I'm hunting her instead of walking in her trap. Agent Fry was nodding slowly. It could work. We set up a controlled scenario where Captain Wright appears vulnerable, monitor all approaches, and capture Vasquez when she makes her move. With one modification, Clay said. We don't just capture her. We use her to roll up the entire network. Every asset she's developed, every piece of intelligence she's stolen, every American who betrayed their country for money. We get them all. Admiral Chin stood up, decision made. Agent Fry, coordinate with your people. Clay, you'll have full support for this operation. Let's end this. Clay counted at least 12 vehicles surrounding the warehouse complex, carrying what appeared to be professional operators, likely mercenaries hired by the compromised military personnel Elena had recruited. They weren't Russian intelligence. They were Americans protecting their own interests by ensuring Elena's escape or death. Elena, listen carefully. Those men aren't here to rescue you. They're here to eliminate both of us. You're a loose end, and I'm a witness. Neither of us is supposed to leave this warehouse alive. Elena's expression shifted as she realized Clay was correct. The approaching vehicles were positioning themselves to control all exits, the classic setup for eliminating everyone inside a target building. What do you propose? Elena asked. Clay smiled grimly. Temporary alliance. We fight our way out together, and then we settle our differences in federal custody rather than in body bags. Elena considered this for exactly 3 seconds before nodding. Acceptable. What's the plan? Clay Wright, the man who had trained the most elite warriors in the world, looked at the Russian intelligence operative who had tried to have him killed and began planning the most unlikely partnership of his career. Outside, the men who had betrayed their country for money were about to discover that hunting Clay Wright was a mistake they would not survive. Chapter 9. No Forgiveness. The final confrontation lasted 43 minutes and resulted in the complete destruction of Elena Vasquez's American network. Clay Wright and Elena Petrov fought their way out of the warehouse complex together, using tactics that combined American special operations expertise with Russian intelligence training. By the time FBI support teams arrived, 12 mercenaries were dead and Elena was in Clay's custody. 6 months later, Clay sat in a federal courthouse in San Diego, listening to his wife's sentencing hearing. Sarah Wright had been convicted of conspiracy to commit murder, espionage, money laundering, and 13 other federal charges. The evidence Clay had provided had been so comprehensive that her defense attorney had recommended pleading guilty to avoid the death penalty. Mrs. Wright, Judge Gerard Graves said, his voice carrying the weight of 30 years on the federal bench, your crimes represent a betrayal of trust that strikes at the very foundation of our national security. You use your position as a military spouse to compromise operations that protect American lives. You betrayed not only your country, but your family. Sarah sat at the defendant's table, her burgundy dress replaced by an orange jumpsuit that made her look older and smaller than Clay remembered. She had not looked at him once during the entire proceedings. The court sentences you to 35 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Clay felt no satisfaction as his wife was led away in shackles. Revenge hadn't restored what he'd lost. It had simply ensured that justice was served. Lawrence Graham received 40 years. General Roger Swanson was court-martialed and sentenced to life in military prison. Elena Vasquez, in exchange for comprehensive cooperation that rolled up Russian intelligence operations in 12 countries, received 25 years in a maximum security facility. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters, but Clay ignored them all. Mitchell and Jordan were waiting by his car, both in civilian clothes that emphasized how much their lives had changed since the warehouse incident. Dad, are you okay? Jordan asked. Clay considered the question. His marriage was over. His trust in institutions had been shattered, and he'd learned that the people closest to him were capable of unimaginable betrayal. But he was alive, his children had chosen integrity over loyalty, and the network that had threatened American special operations was destroyed. I'm fine, he said finally. Mitchell stepped forward. Dad, we need to talk about something. Jordan and I have been discussing our futures, and we've made some decisions. Clay waited. I'm resigning my commission, Mitchell said. The intelligence community has too many people like Mom and Lawrence. I can't serve in an organization where I have to constantly question whether my colleagues are loyal to the country or to their bank accounts. Jordan nodded. I'm leaving the prosecutor's office too. This case showed me how easy it is for people in positions of trust to abuse that trust. I want to work in private practice, helping military families who've been victimized by corruption. Clay looked at his children, both young adults who had chosen their father over their mother when forced to make an impossible choice. What will you do instead? We want to work with you, Mitchell said. You're starting a private security consultancy, right? Something focused on counterintelligence and protecting military families from exploitation. Clay had indeed been considering such a venture. His reputation for identifying and eliminating threats had attracted interest from defense contractors, government agencies, and private corporations. The idea of building something clean, something that couldn't be corrupted by people like Sarah and Lawrence, appealed to him. It would be dangerous work, Clay warned. We'd be targeting people who have already proven they're willing to kill to protect their interests. Dad, Jordan said quietly, we learned from you that some things are worth the risk. Clay Wright looked at his children and made a decision that would define the rest of his life. Wright Security Consultants. Our first case will be identifying and exposing every remaining asset in Elena's network. We're going to make sure no other military families go through what we went through. As they drove away from the courthouse, Clay's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. He expected it to be another reporter seeking a comment, but the message was different. Mr. Wright, my husband was killed in Afghanistan last year during an operation that was compromised. I believe someone in the military sold information that led to his death. Can you help me find out who? Mrs. Allen Villarreal. Clay showed the message to Mitchell and Jordan. They read it silently, understanding immediately that their new mission was already beginning. Dad, Mitchell said, there are a lot of people who need our help. Clay Wright, the man who had survived betrayal by everyone he'd trusted most, looked at the message from a widow seeking justice for her husband's death. For the first time in months, he felt something resembling hope. Then we'd better get to work. 3 years later, Wright Security Consultants had become the most feared counterintelligence firm in the defense industry. They had exposed 17 cases of military corruption, recovered stolen funds totaling over $200 million, and ensured that dozens of traitors spent the rest of their lives in prison. Clay Wright never remarried. He never forgave Sarah, never visited her in prison, and never responded to the letter she sent. When she died of cancer in her 8th year of incarceration, he did not attend her funeral. Some betrayals were unforgivable. Some wounds never healed. But some men were strong enough to build something better from the wreckage of their trust. Clay Wright was one of those men. As the meeting broke up, Clay remained behind to study the files. Somewhere in the intelligence reports and surveillance photographs was the key to finding Elena Vasquez. When he found her, she would discover that hunting the man who trained America's deadliest warriors was a mistake that would cost her everything. The network that had betrayed him was about to learn what happened when they made Clay Wright their enemy. Chapter 8. The Final Hunt. Elena Vasquez, Elena Petrov, had chosen the port of Long Beach for her final operation, and Clay Wright understood why. The massive shipping complex offered multiple escape routes, countless hiding places, and the kind of industrial chaos that made surveillance difficult. It was exactly where he would have chosen for a high-stakes confrontation. Clay positioned himself on the observation deck of a container ship, using night vision equipment to monitor the port facility where Elena had been tracked. FBI surveillance teams were positioned throughout the area, but Clay insisted on taking point. This wasn't just about national security anymore. It was personal. Overwatch. This is Hunter 1. Clay spoke into his tactical radio. Target has been spotted entering warehouse Complex 7. Moving to intercept. Hunter 1, maintain position for support teams, came Agent Frey's voice. Do not engage alone. Clay ignored the instruction and began his descent to the dock level. 3 weeks of investigation had revealed that Elena had been planning this operation for months, using Sarah's foundation as a front to identify and compromise military families. The betrayal went deeper than money. It was a systematic attack on American special operations that had cost lives. Warehouse Complex 7 consisted of 4 connected buildings used for processing international shipping containers. Elena had chosen it because it offered multiple levels, complex sightlines, and access to both land and water escape routes. It was a perfect location for someone who needed flexibility in a crisis. Clay moved through the complex using techniques he'd perfected during urban warfare training, staying in shadows and using sound discipline that would make him virtually invisible to standard surveillance methods. However, Elena Petrov was SVR trained, which meant she had received some of the best counter-surveillance training in the world. He found her on the third level of the main warehouse, positioned near a window that overlooked the shipping channels. She was dressed in dark tactical clothing and armed with a sniper rifle that could eliminate targets at considerable distance. More importantly, she was focused on the approaches to the warehouse complex, clearly expecting Clay to arrive with backup. "Captain Clay Wright," Elena called out without turning from her rifle scope. "I wondered how long it would take you to find me." "Not long enough for you to escape," Clay replied, using his knowledge of the warehouse acoustics to mask his precise location. Elena finally turned to face him, her weapon trained in his general direction. "You've caused considerable inconvenience for my operation. 3 years of careful development, dozens of assets cultivated, millions of dollars in intelligence value, all destroyed because you couldn't be reasonable. Reasonable about my own murder? Reasonable about the bigger picture. Your country's military adventures around the world create opportunities for those wise enough to profit from them." Sarah understood this. Lawrence understood this. Even your father-in-law understood the financial realities of modern warfare. Clay began moving closer, using shipping containers for cover while maintaining conversational distance. "And the SEALs who died because you compromised their missions? What did they understand?" Elena's expression hardened. "Acceptable losses in a larger conflict. Every intelligence operation requires sacrifices, including sacrificing you." Elena paused, her weapon tracking Clay's movement. "What do you mean?" "Your handlers in Moscow aren't planning to extract you, Elena. You've been burned, and burned assets are disposed of, not rescued." Clay stepped into view, his own weapon trained on her center mass. "The Russians know you've been compromised. They've already written you off." "You're lying." Clay activated a device that projected audio through the warehouse speakers, recorded communications between Elena and her SVR handlers that the NSA had intercepted. The conversations made it clear that Moscow considered her exposure a complete mission failure and had no intention of providing extraction support. Elena's composure cracked as she heard her own handlers discussing her elimination as a security risk. They wouldn't. Professional intelligence operatives are expendable, Elena. You know that as well as I do. Clay kept his weapon trained on her while continuing to close distance. "But you have another option." "What option?" "Cooperation. Complete information about your network, every asset you developed, every piece of intelligence you stole. In exchange, you get to live in American prison instead of dying in an American warehouse." Elena was clearly processing her limited options when Clay's tactical radio crackled with an urgent transmission. "Hunter 1, we have multiple hostiles approaching your position." Elena Vasquez was not working alone. Through the warehouse windows, Clay could see vehicles approaching from multiple directions. Elena's extraction wasn't being handled by Moscow. It was being managed by the remaining members of her American network, the assets who knew that her capture would expose them all. "It appears my American friends are more loyal than my Russian handlers," Elena said, her confidence returning. "They understand that my capture would be inconvenient for everyone involved."
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.